But in my head, I imagine this old lady telling another young man who's very busy building a business, building a ministry, and she says, you're trading diamonds for stones. You're trading your children, your family, something that has innumerable value for something that doesn't even matter. And that's the truth. And that's what I want to not only tell the other dads, I want to remind me of that.
Welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer.
And today we get a really cool chance to talk to, I think, a special guest. Todd Wilson has been a speaker, an author, an encourager for a long time. In fact, we talk about exactly how long on the podcast. He is famous for lots of things. In my mind, he's famous for his association with Walmart, and we talk about that in the interview as well. But he's most notably famous, and when I say famous, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, he's most famously known for what you're about to experience in this conversation, which is that Todd has a perspective and an ability to courage that is really a gift from God. And he's used that gift faithfully for many years. And in this conversation, he uses it in a way that I hope encourages you, because it certainly encouraged me. Well, there are few people who have as many reps speaking, being in front of audiences, and teaching on some important subjects as Todd Wilson. And so, Todd, it is just a delight to have you with us. I'm looking forward to asking you a bunch of questions about all of those reps. And so, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast.
Oh, super excited. A great privilege. I love doing this.
Well, Todd, you and I have crossed paths a couple of times on various circuits and spoken different places. But right before we started recording, I said, I know you've been doing this at least 16 years. And when I say this, I mean speaking on parenting, on homeschooling, on marriage and those kinds of things. But you said a little bit more years than that. So how long have you actually been doing this?
I feel like I feel still kind of new at it, but we've been doing this. This is our 24th year. We started, way back, 2002, 2003, and we had a bunch of kids, and we hit the road, and now my kids are grown, and it's and I'm like one of the old guys. They're like, "Oh, Mr. Wilson, my parents loved you. I can remember hearing you as a kid."
I cannot picture you as an old guy, Todd. That's just not going to work for me. I don't care what kind of data and statistics you throw at me; it's not going to work. Well, but I do have what might be a somewhat hilarious sort of association with you. I came to one of your sessions very early when you were traveling in an RV with a bunch of children, and you talked about one of your tongue-in-cheek goals in life was to sleep in every Walmart parking lot, and so. When I pull into a Walmart in various states, inevitably, if it's a new one, I pull in and I think, I wonder if Todd Wilson has spent the night here.
That's a great question. And really, when I'm talking to people, they'll say, "Oh, I live in so-and-so place." And I'm like, "Oh, I've stayed near Walmart." So unique Walmart stays, like never duplicated. Some because we have stayed in a lot of duplicate. I've stayed in some up to like 2 weeks, not all together, but over the years. We've done 296 unique Walmart stays, which there are about 3,000 or 4,000 of them. So we didn't get close, but it's really the only hobby I have in my life is keeping track of those things. So it's kind of
I love
weird.
that. Well, I feel like we should have like a sticker that we can put on a lamp post or something like that. Todd Wilson was here, and I can just check it.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Or at least maybe a public map. You could like flag it and do that.
In fact, I had one going, but it just got kind of too hard to manage, and my wife was kind of nervous that people would just show up because sometimes they did. If I said, "Hey, I'm going to be in so-and-so," I'd have some guy driving around Walmart parking lots going, "I hoped I'd find you here."
Encouraging strangers to meet you in a Walmart parking lot doesn't necessarily seem like the best idea.
Yeah. Not unless you're getting a Facebook Marketplace deal out of it. I mean, that would be my take on it. So. Well, hey, before we jump into all this, Todd, I think that, you're more famous than Dave and I put together for sure. And so lots of our audience will know you. But just in case they don't, tell us a little bit about why you've been in 296 unique Walmarts, and tell us a little bit about your ministry and your organization and the things that you've done. I'd like people to know about you and what you do.
Well, we started out as just homeschooling family. And I thought I'd be a writer at one time. And someone said, oh, you gotta, you're homeschooling. Why don't you see if you could be a speaker in that? And I'm like, well, maybe. And we started this thing that we called the Family Man Ministries, and just to encourage dads of what's most important. And we had some success. I mean, as success means we made more than picking up cans by the side of the road. And so we took it as success. I had been a pastor for 10 years. We had 5 or 6 kids at the time, and we stopped. We just quit cold turkey. Felt God was moving us in this direction. We stepped out in faith. God took care of us every single moment, which He continues to do. And someone said, get an old RV. So we got an old RV. We started driving around the country, going to homeschool conventions and speaking at churches and camps. And but really our ministry kind of stayed the same, even though about 6 or 7 years ago, we saw, hey, we're encouraging these dads, we're surrounded by all these moms who are doing the same thing. They homeschool their kids, and they're missing out on what matters most too. And so we started the Smiling Homeschooler, and we've been encouraging moms ever since then, and even before. But it's been a great thing. So we've written a lot of books, offered a lot of products, just to encourage moms and dads in this family thing, because you get discouraged. And for dads, sometimes you think that what matters is the thing I do, running a ministry, and really that's not what matters. I don't care if anybody remembers Todd Wilson at all, but I have 8 children, and now we're expecting our 11th grandchild, and that's what matters. To have my wife like me. I mean, that's a good thing. And if you blow it in the business part and you get it right in the family part, you'll live happily ever after, and you will have spent your life well. So that's what we do. We point dads and moms in the direction they already want to go. Because I haven't met a dad who doesn't want to be a good dad. Sometimes we lose our way. I lose my way. And it's nice to someone go, hey, it's over that direction. You're go that direction. And so that's kind of what we do.
Well, I know I've been encouraged by you. I've read several of your books. I've heard you speak at various conventions and conferences. It's fun. For years, I could tell you were there because people walk through with the stickers. They
right. We still do.
They wear the T-shirts and stuff like that. It was pretty fun. And so, that's a unique ministry. It's such an important one. I think discouragement is one of the biggest challenges, and maybe one of the strongest tools of an enemy who wants to destroy us is to kind of distract you and discourage you and do all those things. And I'm not immune to that. I've spent seasons of discouragement at times and days and things of that nature. But as we were preparing for this interview, I was thinking about first of all, it's a unique ministry. It's an important one. But I was thinking, wow, you've probably got a really unique perspective. I mean, you're talking about millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. You've got kind of a pretty interesting spectrum of that development. And so one of the questions that's most interesting to me is, Todd, starting out and then 20 plus years later, what are some of the things that you've seen change over time as you've delivered a pretty consistent message? It's grounded in something that's true no matter what. What have you seen in terms of the changes of how people respond to that or what people are looking for? I'm really curious your perspective on that.
As far as homeschooling goes, the change, there's a lot that has remained the same. We still have pressures, but the pressures seem to are coming from different places. Back in the old days, the pressure came from the world. The world was looking at us, kind of with their head cocked and one eye squinted and like, what is going on over there? And, they were skeptical of us, like, there's no way you can educate your children. Over time, they've kind of thrown in the towel and said, okay, you can do this. In fact, you do it better than us. We're going to try to copy you. And so they still may yell, and they've gotten louder sometimes, but they don't have any argument. There's nothing to say. They can't say, hey, look at us, we're doing it so well, because they're not, And so those pressures have kind of dwindled. We used to be, I can remember when we first started homeschooling, if we would go to McDonald's on a Thursday, we were a little fearful. Not like we didn't think we'd be turned in, but we felt like we might have to account for why we were there. And you'd hear those people, isn't there any school today? Now nobody cares. You go to McDonald's on a Wednesday, it's filled with kids. They could be going to school. I don't even know where they're from, but nobody goes to class anymore. And so it's no big deal. There are a lot of homeschoolers, but I sometimes think the pressures have maybe increased, not from the world, but from ourselves, from other homeschoolers, from other homeschool organizations. Because it used to be, it seemed like a pretty simple thing when I started. It was just a bunch of parents trying to educate their kids, and really it was kind of like the way we best saw fit. We knew our kids needed to read, so we taught them to read. We knew they needed to know how to add and subtract and multiply and divide, so we taught them those things. We taught them history because we thought that was a good thing. We taught them about the Bible because we knew that was the most important thing. And then we lived life together. Now there's just so much pressure to make sure you cover this. And are you doing your Latin derivatives? And what about logic and all these other things? And really, it's overwhelming to moms. And I'm seeing moms who felt convinced in their heart that they needed to homeschool their kids, but they come to this conclusion like, I just can't do it. I can't do what everybody's asking me to do. I don't like the school part, and so they quit. And that is so sad to me, because I think the desire almost of every mom is to have their children home. And, I just want I'd like my legacy in this to just tell moms they are doing a good job. Because I haven't met a mom who's not trying her hardest, really, or a dad, And so I think that has changed. We've got lots of how-tos now. We have conventions and online resources and just lots of stuff. But I'm afraid sometimes we've forgotten the why-tos, because it used to be very clear back in the day. Everybody knew why they homeschool. Now I'm not sure we know as well. Some of us started for different reasons. Some because we didn't like the way the system was. We wanted to teach our kids, God's word. Others, we wanted to emphasize some area, But now I feel like the options are more like, oh yeah, it seemed like a good thing to do. We're trying it. And it doesn't carry you very far. Now, that changes sometimes when you're in the midst of it. I met a lot of COVID homeschoolers who were like, yeah, we didn't want to do it, but man, we love doing it. We would never go back. And so, but again, some things have remained the same. There's still not a mom out there who thinks she's doing a good job. They all feel like they're failing, which is not true, but it's always been that same way. I talk to young and old, new and seasoned moms, and they all feel the same way.
That's
and so,
characteristic of motherhood, I think.
It is. It's not dads. Dads all think they're doing better than they really are. Dads are like, I've seen worse. But for moms, and the stakes are still the same. Family still pays off. I guess that's kind of my perspective.
So I think that I think there's that universal kind of motherhood failing. It's interesting to, I've watched the homeschool movement. And I was a homeschool graduate, and then had the same experience. We homeschooled our first kids. It was, we would get stopped in school and so in Walmart, and sometimes they would say, are you homeschooling, or do you homeschool or something? And now I don't remember the last time anybody got stopped
nobody
anywhere.
Cares what you do with
nobody
your
cares, and so that's kind of a real difference. And yes, there was significant outside pressure early on, especially in the legal departments and things like that, and legal arena. And now I think it's kind of changed that, yeah, there's both internal stuff, and like most movements, some of the internal problems become more serious. On that same vein, I think I knew you first, Todd, as somebody who encouraged dads. And, when you started, if I'm doing the math right, we're coming out of kind of the materialistic 90s, really career focused, those kinds of things. And I remember hearing your message and being a young dad myself and thinking that it was unique in the sense that there was not, parenting was still to some extent, and homeschooling was still to some extent a mother's thing, and it wasn't that kind of engagement. And I remember you as sort of a pioneer of really cheerleading and encouraging dads to be involved in that. I'm curious the changes you've seen in that arena in terms of dad's involvement over the years.
That's really interesting because and I would think that most people would probably echo this. That has changed a lot. I know that like when my sons who are dads, they are very much encouraged even by their other friends. Like they're more hands-on. When they come home from work, it's kind of like they've clocked in, and now it's their job to take over. And so that has changed. I think there is a lot of emphasis, and maybe it's a little bit cooler to be the dad than it used to be. But I know that my sons at the same time, they struggle with the same things I do. They face those same things because they want to get stuff done. Like I want to get stuff done. And so you're constantly battling this, what's most important thing. So I think the message maybe is louder. But I don't think, again, internally, or maybe even the end result hasn't changed much. Dads still need to be more engaged. I used to think, when Promise Keepers came around, they would fill stadiums with all these men. And it's like, we kind of like talking about being good dads. We like talking about being good parents. But when it comes right down to it, it's a lot more than talk. Because, I used to think, well, why aren't all these guys who have been challenged quitting their jobs? Why isn't there a mass migration of men leaving their homes, leaving their jobs and going back home? And that's because I think, we have those mountaintop experiences, high experiences, and we want to do, but our flesh is strong and our spirit is weak, and we get pulled back into it. So I think, again, a lot has changed, but not much has changed. And that's kind of comforting to me, I guess, even to think, a couple thousand years ago, the dads were still feeling like I feel now. They were still blowing it. They were still missing those teachable moments. And then they seemed to have all the time in the world at the time, And maybe that'll be the way it goes all the way to the very end. And so they need the family man, to remind them of what's most important. I need the family man. I need someone to remind me. I spend every day thinking about this stuff, and I still get so sidetracked so quickly, so easily. And I need someone to go, hey, you big goof, get back in there. I'm like, you're right.
Well, I think that's the other part that you have that is the perspective. Did you say 11 grandchildren? Did I get that?
Yes, we're expecting our 11th.
11th grandchild. So, as a dad, right, I'm sitting here in this office recording this podcast, and I won't do this, but if you were to pan the camera around, on the other side of the camera is the trim that has never been put down the floor, even though the office is now 2 or 3 years old. If you pan that way, there's a bunch of boxes that I swore would not last more than a week, and now I don't know. It's measured in months. It's probably measured in years. There is a Wood-Mizer sawmill that hasn't been started in 3 years with a bunch of logs.
My son wants it. He wants it.
Tell him he should come and we should use it because and there's a bunch of logs that haven't been sawn because I had this great idea I was going to build the bookshelves for the bottom of the office, and that hasn't happened. In other words, I feel like I get up every day and I'm constantly surrounded by an overwhelming set of evidence of failures, of projects that aren't getting done, things that aren't being finished. And at the same time, I'm trying hard to make the decisions that prioritize relationships, prioritize those kinds of things. And then you have days where you think, I'm pretty sure I'm not doing well at either of those. I've not prioritized the relationships, but I didn't get all the projects finished. I didn't get all the projects finished, but I also didn't have time for relationships. I don't think that's unique. I think that's universal, and I don't know that there's I don't maybe there is, and I'm just too dumb, but I don't think there's a golden bullet that just, silver bullet that just allows you to fix that. I suspect, having read some of your books, you have gone through a similar season, and yet you're on the other side of that in some ways, in a way that I'm not. What does that look like looking back?
I don't know about that other side of the season, other side of it, because I feel the same thing. But I do think I think that struggle is super real. I think everybody, guys feel it. And I think, I was talking to a guy recently, and he said, I'm still in my starter home. The home that I said, this could be our starter home. And we raised our 4 kids, and, I'm having my first grandchild, and you could sense that he felt like he had missed something,
I understand that. There's parts of my house that I think that, I was going to fix that when I moved in. And now it is a stupid long time since we moved in, and it's still there. Yeah. So.
I think, and my wife and I, we talk about this because my wife, I thought, when I had grandchildren, it'd get so much easier, but all my kids live real close. I have probably 5 grandchildren in my house right now that just walked over. I mean, I heard them. I haven't even hardly seen them, but I can hear them upstairs, and we had a birthday party and everybody was over, and it was super loud and super chaotic. And we were watching kids every day. And my wife has said, Todd, we did our time. And I'm like, honey, it's a life sentence. This is not our time. Our time is until they cart out our bodies in wooden boxes. But I think, Jonathan, what you're talking about is something that I think we have to come to as dads and as moms. And I think that's a place of surrender where we just say, okay, I'm okay with this. I know now if your wife is nagging you to get the trim on, then you need to get the trim on, but if it's just something you want to do and wish you could do, maybe it's okay to just say, hey, I'm not going to get it done, or I'm not going to get it done anytime soon, and be okay in it. Because I'd like to, my basement is a pit. My garage is a pit. Everything is a pit right now. And my wife is like, why is everything out of control? And I'm like, because we're spending it somewhere else because we don't have enough time for everything. And I think if we could kind of come to that place where we just say, okay, I'm okay with the unfinished trim with the boxes sitting there. I'll get to them when I can. And if I can't, that's okay too. But I agree with you. I think sometimes we do feel like a failure in that. I mean, I was having lunch with a dad, and he's a good dad. And we were just talking. He looks at me and he goes, I'm a terrible dad. And I'm like, no, you're not. He goes, yes, I am. And he was just, lamenting all the things that he said and did. And there are times I feel like that, and times that all the dads feel like that. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten about 3 days after Christmas that they'll say, Todd, I ruined Christmas at my house, Why would I choose to make my kids cry on Christmas Eve? And I get such pleasure from those emails, actually, because I've done the same thing. I've had videos where dads have sent me where they're all planning this big event. They're singing happy birthday to, and then one of the kids flips a balloon and it hits the dad right in the eye, and it's like all over, And I'm like, that's the beauty of family. That's the beauty of doing something good. It is hard, but as I've come to believe that hard things are good. And good things are hard. And it'd be easy to say, well, if I just work a little bit harder, if you just organize your time, Jonathan, you'd take care of these things. Have you thought about making a checklist? And those things maybe they work for a little while.
I can do one better. I have a checklist and a perennial thing that shows up in my checklist is schedule reset. and I copied it down today, and I have a stack of these little pads that I use as my daily task trackers, And I just had this demoralizing thought this morning, and I thought, how many years of notebooks do I have that say schedule reset? Because I know it's years. I know it's years that I've been like, if I could just rearrange a little bit, if I could just change, if I get a little bit more discipline in there. And so I think that I really resonate with what you said about surrender. But I'm going to poke one more thing to get your perspective on.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to say, and I know what this looks like. Kind of, I mean, I don't know what your life looks like, but from the outside, somebody say, "Oh, look at Todd." You know, I mean, man's been at 300 and some Walmart parking lots. You know, almost 300 and some Walmart parking lots. He's built a great big business and ministry. He's got some level of fame. He's got these books published, and so I know that there's another side of that. And yet, to cut through that, Todd, that is a significant accomplishment. You've done real work that's meaningful, that's helped a lot of people, and so you can. And I'm sure your first reaction is like, "Yes, but let me tell you." Okay, sure. But you have surrendered. You had that point where you walked away from full-time ministry. You stepped into something new. And then many years later, you're still successfully doing it. And you made more money than picking up cans alongside the road.
Barely.
Right. Well, when you said that, I thought that was said with a almost like sort of. Like an almost
right.
over top of that.
It depends on how many cans you pick up.
So the question is, how have you managed some of that balance, right? That between that surrender, it's not going to get done, and we're going to have to schedule a couple more conventions if we're going to pay the mortgage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's that tension that I think is universal, and I don't expect you to have a magic answer, but I'm curious about your experience with it.
Well, here's what I've done, you know, and I mean, you painted a really glorious picture. It's not anything like that, you know.
I know from being on the inside of something else, right?
That. But that's what everybody thinks. Yeah. Everybody looks on, and not just me. They look at everybody. I mean, they think they, and even if you lived in a pigsty, you know, you look at somebody else and you go, but I bet you he has the relationships right. You know, I bet you he, you know, so it doesn't
At least he didn't have to
matter.
worry about cleaning his garage. Yeah.
Exactly. But there have been times, I still do it all the time. I'm like, God, if you want this done, you've called me to do this. If you want it done, you're going to have to take care of it. Because, you know, I'm going to do this other thing that I think is more important. You know, about scheduling, you know, or bringing in income. Because it's a scary thing to live where I live. Because I don't have anybody who's like, gives me a paycheck. You know, I don't know if these people are going to get tired of hearing me speak. Because I get tired of hearing me speak, you know. But I feel like God has brought us to this point. He's taken care of us for 24 years. Why would he stop now? And I just will say to him, God, if you want my family to be this way, then you're going to have to do you're going to have to do it because I can't do it all. You know, I mean, you're going to have to get this done. You're going to have to make this car last longer. You're going to have to bring something else in because I just can't do it. And maybe that is part of that surrender. And I do think, you know, as you were just describing me, sometimes I am poisoned when I look at others. You know, if I look at somebody else's, website, I'm like, wow, look at their schedule. Look how many places there, and I feel pretty good. like my RV, which I just sold last year. Man, it was 34 years old. It was an amazing RV. But when I started when I'd be around somebody with a new RV, mine looked like a donkey cart. You know, and I'm like, this is junk. Why are we, you know, and I feel that way sometimes. I feel pretty good about life when I just do our life. But when I start looking around and I think, I mean, I came to business with God even in this ministry, you know, because people would come to me and say, oh, Todd, you're doing a great job. I could show you how to do it bigger. You know, wouldn't you like to reach more? And now when people say that, I'm like, I'm good. You know, I don't need to reach anymore. This is good. Yeah, but wonder if it dwindles. I'm good with that too, you know, because I'm just going to be me. And I think it's 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where it says, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. And really to work with your own hands, mind your own business. Sometimes that is the exact in-your-face opposite of what everyone else says. To lead a quiet life, you know, I mean, and really, Jonathan, your life right now and your clutter and your undone trim with how many children do you have? 6 children?
8, yeah.
8 children. 8 children. I think your website says 6. Does it say?
It probably does.
With 8 children, man, you are living the life. You have it all. You know, my fear is for dads that will trade that for stuff that doesn't matter. I read this book, or actually, I took this quote. I included it in my own book. I've never been able to attribute to any other book. I can't find the quote anywhere. I've looked. I've reread the book that I thought it was from over and over and over again. I cannot find the quote. So maybe I
might
made
be
it
yours.
up.
It might be yours.
Might be. But in my head, I imagine this old lady telling another young man who's very busy building a business, building a ministry, and she says, you're trading diamonds for stones. You're trading your children, your family, something that has innumerable value for something that doesn't even matter. And that's the truth. And that's what I want to not only tell the other dads, I want to remind me of that as well. Because, like I said, I sometimes feel old, and I don't see the end of the tunnel, but I can see the light now. I can see that it does not stretch on forever. And I'm like, I tell my wife, I said, man, how many more years do we have as just being the actor? I said, let's do it now. Yes, we have eternity, and I want to do that. But, if I'm saving these dollars for something that I think can't come at the end, I don't want to do that. Let's just spend it and do it, because we're not going to have this opportunity again. And so, if you're thinking about taking that vacation, thinking about doing something with your family, thinking about building this thing for your family, I'd do it, because, and then let it fall apart right before your eyes, because it won't get all the way done. And, but it's hard, I think, and I think it's universal. I think most dads feel it. If you're an engaged dad, you're feeling it. If you're getting everything done you need to get done, you may not be feeling it, but you should be.
Oh, I think, Todd, this has been really encouraging, I hope, for especially like the dads and moms who have been listening to this. I am also just curious, as we're wrapping up here, what your perspective would be for younger people who aren't parents yet, because we do have an interesting mix in our audience of parents and of young people who maybe are married or want to get married and are thinking about and know that having kids is a blessing, but also are a little bit intimidated and a little bit terrified by that, and already, even before they have the kids, are afraid of, what if I mess it up, or already feel like I'm going to be a terrible parent if I do have kids, and just struggle with that inadequacy. So
well, join the club. I will just tell you right off the bat, you are going to be a terrible parent. You are going to be a terrible husband, you're a terrible wife at times. That's what everybody is. I mean, I tell other people, it's my job to give my kids baggage to work through later. God knows that. I mean, that's the beauty of family. I mean, it is a great thing. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. I was talking to my mom the other day, and I'm like, I don't get it why some people don't like to let their kids see them argue and fight. I'm like, I think we owe it to our kids to fight, and then show them how it's resolved. Because wouldn't it be a tragedy if you got to the end of your life and your kids thought, well, mom and dad never had these problems, because that's just not true. And so, to anybody who doesn't have kids, I wouldn't sweat it, because, God's got to get you right where he wants you to be. I know that sometimes my children, I have a 25-year-old, a 20-year-old, and an 18-year-old who are not married, sons. And I think sometimes they see the value of family. They want a family. And I know my daughter, when she was 18, she was just convinced she was going to be a spinstress. And she's like, I haven't met anybody, Dad. I'm not, And I'm like, and as a dad, I would remind her that God's got a plan. God's got it all worked out. I would not worry at all about what the future holds. I would just be faithful in what you're doing right now, because God's preparing you for whatever he has for you. And if it's to be a dad of 10 children, hey, you're going to be just perfect for it. If it's a mom of having to be, just a couple kids, or maybe you're going to be single, you don't have to worry about that. God's got a plan for you. And that takes a lot of pressure off, because it's not all about you. And I'm kind of okay with that. And even I'll tell you, as a dad, again, I used to think it was my job to get my kids perfect. So when they left my house, they would have it all down. They wouldn't have to make the same mistakes I did. That was a wrong way of thinking, because God has hard lessons for everybody. Sometimes you have to get fired from a job to learn exactly what God would have you learn. You have to, get all your paperwork in, and it's all, illegible, like a third grader wrote it. And for them to turn it down, to realize that maybe you have to be a little neater the next time. Those are the lessons that really matter. And, I think God has those lessons for all of us, for me, for my kids. And that's not a bad place to be. Even when I see my sons, struggle in being dads right now, or when I know their wife is mad at them, I get great joy out of it, actually. And it makes me feel happy because I know they're going to be okay, because they're going to figure it out, because their mom and dad figured it out, and they watched the whole thing, and God's working in them and through them, and He's going to finish what He started. And I'll tell you, that just takes all the pressure off. We all feel so much pressure that we think, man, if it's all, we started by talking about homeschooling. We think if I make a mistake, they're going to pay the price. You're going to make lots of mistakes, and some of the price they're going to have to pay, but that's okay. And dads are the same way. So there's my concluding wisdom.
Well, I'd hate to build on any concluding wisdom if we're gonna stop there, but I will say, Todd, I appreciate you alluded to this. I appreciate your sharing. I appreciate the knowledge you brought and the perspective you brought. I appreciate the sacrifice and the hard work you put into bringing that message out. That is a response to a faithfulness, to a call. And I think I have some awareness of what that might be in terms of
I was just standing for the
insecurity.
Walmarts.
Yeah, well, in terms of the insecurity and in terms of how that kind of plays out. But I was going to conclude that if there's one thing you should take away from here, it's that the next time you were at a Walmart, you should look at the lamppost and see if you see that sticker, because that might be a legacy.
I might
that's
steal
coming
that
here,
idea, actually.
You don't have to steal it. We will give it to you. There would make me nothing more excited if I pulled into a Walmart and been like, look at that
Todd
sticker.
was here.
So Todd was here. So
Okay, I like it.
well, no sticker for the podcast yet, at least. But Todd, thank you for being here. I appreciate, and for all the places you've been, but for being here on this podcast, we appreciate your perspective, your wisdom, and your enthusiasm as always. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's important stuff.
Well, even as someone who is not a dad yet, I left that conversation being encouraged and being excited about fatherhood, even if that's not something that's impending for me as of yet. And I really think this tied in a lot with what we've talked about in some previous episodes of the podcast, just about the nature of failure and the metrics that we use to measure success. Todd, I think, has a really good perspective on letting go of so many of the things that we will tend to lose sleep over and play the comparison game on, as far as, are we doing enough? Are we doing as much as the person that we see ourselves as being like or want to be like? And just seeing someone who has been around the block and has, obviously raised quite a few kids and done it for quite a few years while doing a lot at the same time, hearing him say, just, you're going to mess it up and that's okay. And just, God is going to redeem that anyway. I find that really refreshing and encouraging.
Yeah, he said some universal things. You don't have to be a parent to catch that last part of the conversation. You're going to make mistakes. You can't do it all. You're going to have to let go and trust God. And that is a truth that most of us know, and it's a truth that's hard to live out. And so we need people like Todd encouraging us and reminding us of those realities. So it was indeed encouragement for me. I resonate with a lot of things that he said. I hope it encouraged you as well. And as we are wrapping this up, it is worth noting that kind of encouragement, that kind of connection, the people that come along, and when you're weak, they're strong, and when you're strong, they are weak, as you get to help. That's what being a community is all about. And one of the things that we do at Unbound is that we have an opportunity to work in those kinds of communities. We get to strengthen those kind of communities, and we get to experience those kinds of communities. And so if you're looking for some encouragement, if you're looking for people that kind of naturally help lift each other up, go to beunbound.us and take a look at our programs, particularly our post-high school program, Ascend, which really is a unique community where you have people that are able to see each other in all areas of their life and say, hey, let me encourage you. Let me remind you that things don't always go perfectly. And when they don't, let me point you to some higher truth. And that's one of the exciting things about what we get to do. And like Todd, it takes some sacrifices. It takes some work. It takes some interesting twists and turns. But it always remains worth it because of the people we get to work with. So check out beunbound.us if you want to learn more about that. Thank you for joining us and for this conversation. And until next time, be unbound.